Welcome to the Leadership Under the Microscope interview series, Plain Talk by Pragmatic Leaders, a production of JR Global. Today, we continue our series of interviews with innovative leaders from around the world. These episodes convene conversations about their stories and examine the pitfalls, priorities, parameters, and pragmatism of being a leader in the global community. Here is your host, J.R. Klein.
My guest today is Josef Bruchschlogel. Mr. Bruchschlogel studied telecommunications and media economics at the University of Applied Science in Poland, Austria, and graduated summa cum laude in 2000. At the age of 21, he was appointed as Director of E-commerce at Telecom Austria Group and established the online sales of telecom services as Europe's pioneer in the field. In 2009, he joined Kwak Telecom as Vice President for Carrier Relations and was promoted to Chief Operating Officer a year later. In 2013, he was named Kwak's Chief Executive Officer, where he has become a major driver in the development of the industry and established premier rates as a payment tool for global out. Josef holds a master's degree in engineering from the University of Applied Sciences in St. Pölten and is alumnus of the prestigious Oxford Advanced Management and Leadership program at the Side Business School, where he was named Outstanding Alumnus in 2016. CV Magazine calls him the most influential CEO of the year 2019 Telecommunications. Today's guest is Mr. Josef Bruchschlogel. He comes to us from Austria today. Josef, welcome to the program.
Great pleasure meeting you, JR. Good to see you again.
Josef and I come from a background that is not dissimilar from the places that we have been. We both come out of the Oxford Advanced Management and Leadership program, and he has distinguished himself by his innovative approach to leading. Today, Josef, we really want to listen to your story. So if you would, start us out by talking about how did you get to where you are today? What's your story? How did you move through your career ventures, your life ventures to get to where you are, and maybe tell us a little bit about what your current passions are.
This was a pretty bumpy road over the time. So I was born and grew up in a tiny town in Austria, in the Austrian Alps, Bruchschlogel. It's a 15,000 inhabitant town here in the middle of the Austrian Alps. And I moved on after doing high school here, studying telecommunications and media economies at the University of Applied Science in St. Pölten, where I first got in touch with internet technology, broadcasting, the telecommunication world, etc. And back then we had to do mandatory volunteering during the 7th semester, where I ended up with Telekom Austria, the national incumbent of telecoms in Austria. And it was a pretty funny time back then. It was 1999, so it was just the upcoming of internet. And imagine it was a time where Google didn't even exist back then. Nobody knew about Facebook or all those fancy social media things. And the first project I got there, since nobody had an idea of marketing, whatever, it was state-owned companies, before this, people had to fill out forms to even get the telephony line. After 6 weeks as a volunteer, my boss came up to me and said, you did this internet thing at university, didn't you? I said, yes, I did. So now you're responsible for the launch of DSL technology in Austria. So after 6 weeks being a volunteer, I was in charge of maybe one of the biggest projects in telecom Austria ever saw, bringing broadband to the country. And it was quite an experience. So I had no clue what to do, and it was kind of jumping into cold water, but it was great fun, and I realized that the world of telecommunications is something I like. And so the volunteering thing lasted for approximately 6 months, and afterwards I wanted to go back to university and doing my master's in engineering. And so my chief marketing officer back then came to me and said, you just did this internet thing with the DSL technology for us, isn't it? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, okay, Telecom Austria wants to have an e-commerce channel. Would you like to stay with us and to this setup of an online shop and the e-commerce processes, etc.? And so I agreed, doing my master's in parallel with my full-time job at Telecom Austria. And maybe 1 year later, at the age of 21, they promoted me as the director of e-commerce, becoming a member of the second management layer of Telecom Austria and the director. And so I stayed there for a couple of years, developing the online shop of Telecom, developing the so-called partner web, where we served our resellers, developed the B2B channels and the logistics behind. And so at the age of 25, I had the feeling to hit a certain glass ceiling. You know, nobody makes somebody a board director at the age of 25 when it's about state-owned companies. So I was thinking, okay, how do I proceed? What's my next career steps? And I decided to open up my own tiny consulting firm, specializing on IT, specializing on internet technology and e-commerce. And lucky me, rather soon came up a very big customer, back then Deutsche Post, who assigned me the project of corporate wear, which was my first project on global scale. The intent was to stuff all the 600,000 employees of Deutsche Post with new corporate garment. And I was in charge as the chief business consultant to set up the supply chain, to set up the online ordering, to set up the logistics, the storing of the goods, the delivery. And I really loved it because it was for me the first chance to get in touch with Asia, with the United States, etc., which also created some difficulties. For example, we made these beautiful uniforms for the postal employees. And we tried to approach this with a classical sizing system, small, medium, large, and so on. And the first thing I figured out is that small, medium, large in Northern America means something totally different than in Southeast Asia. So we had to come up with innovative things like self-measuring and producing on demand. And it was a great success. People were happy. The board of directors, they were happy. The press covered the project on huge scale. And so my immediate next client was then Deutsche Telekom, also in Bonn, Germany, where I was in charge of Schools to the Net. Schools to the Net was an internet initiative driven by Deutsche Telekom and the German Ministry of Education. And back then, the idea was to set certain nationwide standards for education, especially for elementary schools and high schools. So they wanted to have equal testing in Bavaria as in Schleswig-Holstein and in Berlin and so on. And my job was on one hand to align the interest of the German teachers and the ministry, and on the other hand to build an internet platform where all these things like e-learning, online collaboration, etc. could be facilitated. And it was quite interesting for me because it was a sort of private-public partnership, which I consider a very interesting sort of business. And yeah, I did this project. And soon later, Kwak Telecom came up to me in the year, it was then 2009, so I was just 31, and asked me if I would be interested to take the job as Vice President Carrier Relations, which was again attracting to me because Kwak is doing its business on global scale, and I like this international approach and so on. And so I agreed, moving most of the time to Cyprus, where still our headquarters are, also working from our German offices. And somehow I fell in love with the company because 1.5 years later I was promoted Chief Operating Officer. Since 2013, I'm leading the firm as its Chief Executive. So I'm still here. I think 4 weeks from now, I'm celebrating my 10th anniversary with the firm. And yes, this was the journey. Maybe to mention also, when I became CEO, I realized there's a lot to learn. And as you know from your own experience, being CEO and being the ultimate decision maker demands certain qualities of you. And in 2014, a great opportunity occurred to me, being invited and accepted for the Advanced Management Program in Oxford, you already mentioned, where I was not just able to learn a lot of things, but also to interact with great characters and individuals. You mentioned we were meeting there. And yeah, that's to make a long story short, my career path. I'm still CEO of Kwak Telecom and trying to sell telecommunications services all around the place.
And that's a very interesting story. You've certainly mastered the knack of being in the right place at the right time.
Oh, indeed, JR, you know, there's a little competence, a lot of engagement, and a good portion of luck you have to have, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd like to think that life becomes that easy, you know, that all you have to do is show up, which I believe you really do. But there's also some challenges in there that you had to face. There are some things that didn't work out exactly like you wanted them to. What were some of those challenges, some of those big barriers that you had on this journey?
I think I mentioned before my job at Telecom Austria and leaving it and building my first tiny consulting firm. And I think due to the fact that I was rather successful at an early age, I was on the brink becoming a little bit arrogant and too self-confident. And back then, when I left the firm and figured out how to acquire clients and customers, I had the first big learning experience. The big firm behind you is always more important than yourself are. So I was a little bit overwhelmed and also put down on the ground in terms of not becoming too hybrid and becoming too self-confident. For me, especially at this age of 25, it was a very important learning experience that you have to run for your success. You should not mix up the reputation of your firm and your own. Life is much more difficult when you're not spending millions of euros, but have to run after clients to acquire them. And it was a good portion of luck back then to acquire Deutsche Post and establish my reputation as a consultant. I think another great learning experience was when I did the Deutsche Post project, in terms of, I already mentioned, it was my first exposure on global scale and dealing with different cultures, with different languages, with different approaches to work ethics, to how things are approached, was quite important to me and a very big learning. And this also reflected when I moved to Kwak. You have to imagine we're a tiny boutique firm, we're 20 people. Nevertheless, we have employees from currently 14 different nations. So people coming from Iraq, from Nigeria, from China, from Poland, from Austria, all over the place. And one of my big challenges was back then was, on the one hand, accepting and engaging with the strengths of the individuals and their cultural backgrounds. On the other hand, founding common ground, how people interact and how to align them at the end of the day and going for one goal. And this is something where I'm still learning a lot. This is also some of my big learnings out of the Oxford Advanced Management and Leadership Program, where we have also been 35 people from all sorts of cultures and backgrounds, etc. And this is something I consider as not just challenging, but extremely interesting to work on that and to facilitate the strengths out of this turf, if you like.
It is indeed an experience that changes you, and it changes really your perspective. I'm interested in your thinking, sort of drilling down a little bit. I'm hearing some of the lessons that you've learned, some of the challenges that you've had. Do you consider that you have a certain style in your leadership or a certain approach to leading? You're talking about you've got employees, you're working with not only customers in your market, but you're working with employees. What's your thinking on sort of your leadership style or your approach?
In terms of leadership style, I'm deeply convinced that happy chicken make bigger eggs. So, and I'm also aware of the fact that we are spending more time in office and with our colleagues than we spend with our families, than with our friends, with our outside community. So I think building culture based on trust and mutual understanding and sympathy that works is one of the major preconditions of being successful. So I try to apply a very lean management style where people have to trust to come up with issues and problems without having the feeling coming to the big office of the chief executive and being afraid of sharing good as well as bad news. So I think one of the most important things is building a layer or a basis of trust and mutual understanding, because this is where you can build on. The second thing is, I think the matter of alignment is one of the greatest challenges, but also the most important task of a CEO when it comes to make people work as a team and follow the thin red line of how to achieve superior performance. I think this is also, we often talk about strategy and so on. One thing is figuring out what might be a good plan and what could we do to be better than the competition, etc. But this is just a small portion of the game. Once you have identified where you want to go, the much harder work is align people and creating a style where everybody can rely on each other and know where we're heading to. So I think things like sharing information, being transparent with the people, having a mutual understanding, what are the company goals, having low barriers of communications, having an easy approach how to communicate among different hierarchy levels is extremely important to get the best out of the team. And I always like football metaphors, and football in a European sense, not in the US sense. So you call it soccer, I think. When you take a look at great football teams like Barcelona or Real Madrid, they make the appearance that each member of the team always know where the ball will be and what his individual task will be to shoot the goal. And highly complex things look quite fluently and easy. This is because they train much and they have the mutual trust in the competence of each other. And this is something I try to apply on my leadership style, that things look easy, that things are easygoing, that people are not afraid of having failures or problems, because I think this is an integrative part of what we're doing. And I remember at my early years with Telecom Austria, I was part of the high potential program of the firm. So it was a management training, and they tried to teach us how to lead and how to make plans and organize, etc. And I still remember it was the lecture of a very bright person, Dr. Jochen Block. And he showed a PowerPoint slide, and the PowerPoint slide said, management means solving problems. Then he switched to the second slide and it said, who does not like problems should better leave now. So from this, and this somehow stuck to my head, and by respecting my people, by trying to be not just a leader, but also a trusted colleague, I think the way of collaborating, etc., gets easens up. People take risks despite of the risk of failure, and know that they're not punished for doing things wrong, because I don't have to explain you have a longer career than I have. Mistakes happen. And I think that the more relaxed the approach towards this is, and the more the mutual understanding is, the better it is. So to wrap up, my leadership style is, I would explain it or describe it as a lean management. I describe it as management by open doors. I'm spending a lot of time at the coffee machine and having coffee with my colleagues, because I'm having the experience that the communication goes more fluid in a non-formal environment than if you ask people to the boardroom. And so an easy-to-go approach with the deep understanding that neither I am nor anybody else is perfect.
I really believe that this focus on trust that you have found as your sort of essential kernel is one of the big things that's missing in many leadership styles. It's encouraging to hear a young man like yourself, who is taken as a basic element of their style, as trusting people. I'm going to guess that this isn't the end of the road for you, and that you have a lot of things that you want to accomplish, things that you would like to get done. You have objectives that you want to achieve. Talk to us a little bit about what are you headed for? What do you think is left to be done inside of your world?
Oh, there are many things left to be done, and I think when it comes to my corporate role, I'm still on the learning, and the good thing is, as long as we do it, will never be perfect. So there's a long learning path ahead of me. I realize the longer I do it, the better the self-confidence of my capabilities, but also about the knowledge of my non-capabilities become. So it's as I'm saying to my team all the time, it's a marathon and not a sprint. So from that point of view, we have A couple of goals. So, of course, we want to grow Kwak Telecom further. We just raised an initiative we call Kwak Capital, where we the first time step into mergers and acquisitions. So we will not just grow organically as we did during the last couple of years, but we applying some mergers, which is a new field for me because I'm not having that much experience in integrating companies by buying them. The other thing is we want to, of course, grow organically. And since we are in the micropayment business facilitated by premium rate numbers, there are incredible new options coming up. We're used to serve TV stations, radio stations, etc., with premium rate numbers for voting, for polling, for client interaction. But now we see a totally change of media environment. YouTube become more important than TV ever was. So YouTube influencers having more reach in the market than the biggest TV stations. And we're currently figuring out how to serve those guys with our product. Then, of course, the whole thing of social media affects us because on the one hand, you have the interaction through the apps. On the other hand, things like Instagram, like Snapchat, like Facebook, like broadcasting through those platforms is becoming really big. Then we drive the internationalization of the firm. So we have currently clients in approximately 110 countries, and my personal goal would be to hit the 198, so to have a real global footprint and cover the whole world, which of course demands the building of the team. As I already mentioned, we have a very international team, and for me it cannot be international enough because I consider it as a real asset serving people in their mother tongue, understanding their culture and their needs in a proper manner. And so these are some of my corporate goals where I want to develop. The other thing is I started teaching at University of Applied Science in St. Pölten, my alma mater, 2.5 years ago, where I'm giving a course on case studies of business development, which I consider an extremely interesting disposal of my time, because I love the interaction with the master students, young people full of ideas, having the finger of the pulse of the trends. So I'm not pretty sure if I learn more from them as they learn from me. Which I love to do. It's, as I said, I'm teaching a masterclass there, and it's a really enjoyable thing. Since last year, I also I'm a member of the board of the advisory board of the university, where I can influence a little bit the strategy and where the university is heading. Because this is one of my values that I think educating the next generation of leaders is one of the most noble things you can do, and you get an immediate feedback. I try to be in touch also with the classes which are not more with me anymore, and give some mentoring, etc. And this is definitely something, the more experienced I get, the more I consider it as valuable also to share my experience with the younger generation. And then, of course, for the next couple of years, my two daughters are aged 14 and 10, and this is also a huge assignment in terms of the elder one is now in high school, the younger one is starting high school. I would love seeing them on great universities and guiding them to a prosper and interesting life, which is not always easy with teenagers, as you can assume. But this is also a sort of leadership role I really appreciate, and which I consider as highly important. And so these are the current challenges and goals ahead of me. So the three pillars, the corporate thing, the university thing, and of course family and friends. And yeah, I'm fortunate enough to bring all those things under one umbrella, and so yeah, that's where I'm heading to.
It's very interesting that you are showing the value of character of a leader, because you're very holistic in your approach to leadership. You just don't lead while you're at work. You lead while you're in the community. You lead when you're with your family. It's very encouraging. So you mentioned here a little bit when you were talking about your work at St. Polton's with the graduate students. If you had the opportunity here to talk specifically to young leaders coming into the market, or to our contemporary leaders who are dealing with the kinds of questions that leaders deal with or are emerging into this, what would be the advice that you'd give?
First of all, be honest. Be yourself. I think this is the most important lesson somebody can learn. Being not truthful and not being straight always backfires sooner or later. So I generally think that nobody should be allowed to play the game at all if there's not a deep sense of honesty. Because as we talked before about trust, the precondition for any sort of trust is honesty and reliability. So this is the basis of everything. And then I would boil it down to a couple of things I really consider as important to build one's strategic edge and to build one's capabilities and the role in society. The first one I would relate to is build sustaining relationships. It's so much about collaborating with people, dealing with people, having the trust of people, having the support of people, that the relationship thing is something you cannot stress enough. And take a good portion of your time to build those stable relationships. The second thing is work as a team. There are smart people out there, but normally teams create the better outcome. And that's now very on the surface, and please take it as a joke, but highly intelligent people have an IQ of 120, 130. The average ape has an IQ of 60. So if you just put 3 apes on a table, they're smarter than the smartest individuals. So work as a team cannot be emphasized too much. Then, of course, create alignment. If people work together, you have to have a mutual understanding what the thing is about and what is the direction people shall head to. The fourth thing I consider extremely important is setting strategic direction. What is the game plan to achieve superior performance? And in days like this, where everything is quick and our information flows are quick, we're receiving 150 emails each day and 50 calls on the cell phone and everywhere. Take the time to reflect. What is your strategic game plan? How do you want to achieve superior performance? I think this cannot be overstressed. And then I think the delivery of results is enormously important, because when you're long enough in the business, you know a lot of people who have a great plan, who love talking and building big visions, but they never deliver. But at the end of the day, the best plan is worth nothing if you cannot achieve the necessary results. So do not forget about bringing things down to earth and make them happen. And as a last thing, and everybody who does a job or who lives long enough knows that you have to cope with pressure. It's not always easy going. It's not always the easy way. Sometimes you have to deal with setbacks. You have to deal with difficulties and problems. And learning coping with pressure at an early stage in your career, I think, is a very important thing and makes the rest of your career path much easier in terms of also not taking things too personal, learning that failure and problems are unfortunately part of the game. Doing the necessary learnings out of it, but you will not go through a career path without the capability of coping with pressure and dealing with setbacks. And so having those pillars, creating sustaining relationships, working as a team, setting a strategic direction, creating alignment among the team, delivering results, and coping with pressure, I think, is a sort of cooking recipe. If you deal with that properly, not too much things can go wrong.
Well, Josef, this was very enlightening, very insightful in the way that you have thought through your approach. And it is, the proof is certainly in the pudding as we see how the ventures that you have and are pursuing are really getting a quality of performance that is very desirable. Thank you very much for taking your time with us today. We do appreciate it, and we will watch you with delight and admiration.
Thank you very much, JR. It was my pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation. I know that usually you're talking to much greater leaders than I am. Thank you for your time, thank you for the invitation, and I hope to see you soon in Oxford.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk by Pragmatic Leaders. J.R. Klein is an Oxford-published author, speaker, and global business consultant. JR Global specializes in socially responsible business consulting. To learn more, visit jrglobal.co. Thank you for listening.